Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Radical Workplace. My name is Shale Risman, and I'm here with my beloved co-host Mary Ellen Duncan. Hi, Mary Ellen.
Hi, Shale.
How's it going?
Here. Really good. Happy that
Awesome.
we're doing this. This is amazing. We're going to
Yeah.
have great candid convos, and it's exciting.
Yes, very, very much so. And I'm particularly excited because this today's guest is obviously a very, very good friend of mine,
Yes.
but someone who I've always wanted to actually sit down and discuss, his trajectory because, Tomer Strolight, who is our guest, he, started out the way that most of us did his career in 1994. He was in his early 20s. He had a couple of degrees in business, and he graduated from York, like I said, with a couple of degrees in business, got to a startup. And then, what the startup was putting together this, CD-ROM before a CD-ROM based magazine, before CD-ROMs were even a real thing.
Yeah.
I know he was talking about, just a CD-ROM burner costs $3,000. So, and now they're basically giving them away. But basically, his trajectory was straight up. He joined the leading newspaper in Canada, the Toronto Star. And his first project there was essentially to build a digital presence before anyone else had anything like that. So he remained there for 16 years, saw the building of the Toronto Star news website, and not just that. He developed Workopolis, he developed WagJag, he developed any number of other assets for Torstar before he left. And the big thing that he's doing now is essentially being an evangelist for Bitcoin. And it's really turned his life around, and it's really, his passion is obviously very visible, but he had some amazing insights into, the early days of digital assets, and to, why his passion and his integrity led him to leave Torstar. And, I think these are all really, really important elements of entrepreneurship and
success.
And all the while in there, we talked about, the kind of people that he needed to hire, the things he learned, the mentors that he had. And again, it's just a really great path to watch someone like Tomer go straight up and then, kind of figure out his next direction, and took a complete left turn from his business profile into going into essentially being a Bitcoin evangelist. So it's all good. With no further ado, let's have that conversation with Tomer.
Let's just jump right in.
Let's go right in. Tomer, welcome. It's always lovely to see your face.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever heard that said to me once before in my life yet. So,
and certainly not from me. Don't forget either.
That's true. That's true. I'd return the let me return the compliment.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
It's always heartwarming to see your face.
Full disclosure, Tomer and I have known each other a very long time. I'm going to say 35 or so years, like way too many that we should be counting. But anyways, I'm thrilled. You were one of the first names that was on my list to have this discussion with, and talk about your incredible career, and where you've landed after all the exciting things that you have done in business, and certainly in digital, way back into the early 90s. And made decisions and had business ideas that have influenced how other people make decisions in an online world, which, I think you come from a very unique perspective on that. So we're extraordinarily excited. Let's just dig in, I think is the best thing to do.
Sure. Dig.
Did you, when you were starting out, when you were in high school, let's say, is this a drive? Was entrepreneurship or business leadership a drive for you? Was it something that you always knew you would do, or was it something you picked up on a little bit later?
I never really had a vision to be a businessman. I was like, if you're thinking back in high school, I was really enamored with girls and friends. And
yeah, I totally get that.
And And art, like fiction. I really loved reading. I was curious. I was much more moved by fiction than nonfiction, for example. So that, I'd say that described my high school. And thrill seeking. I was a thrill seeker in high school, which maybe is something that actually lent to some of the excitement in business that I got involved in. But I ended up on this trajectory when I went to university. I took I took a mishmash of courses like so many people did. And I got good enough grades in things like economics and such that I fell into a business degree program in my undergraduate and ended up taking a graduate degree in business. And so that kind of seemed like the die was cast by the education that I took. And I mean, you and I knew each other where we really met was at summer camp. And you remember my jobs where I taught paddle sports, canoeing and kayaking. And then I took a creative job there. I ran the video production activity over there. So,
you did a great
there was
job.
No real sense. Yeah, thank you. There was no real sense of wanting to do business. But the more I studied business, the more I fell in love with certain things about the possibilities that business made available to individuals, the achievements that business made available to individuals, and the excitement. When I was in business school was just when the internet was coming about. It was before Netscape existed, which was the first commercial browser for people who are too young to even know what Netscape is. And so there was the first internet browser. It was called Mosaic while I was in my final year of university.
Oh my God, Mosaic. I haven't heard that in such a long time.
Yeah. Well, pause, because I don't even know what that is.
Okay. Do you know who Mark Andreessen is? Of Andreessen Horowitz?
I've never heard of that name.
Okay. So Andreessen Horowitz is kind of this really big and successful venture capital firm out of Silicon Valley, of course. And Mark Andreessen was the original coder, the original developer of Mosaic, which was the first graphical browser for the World Wide Web. And then he was paid to start a new company called Netscape, which is really essentially seen as the first .com that paved the way. It created access to the internet. It created businesses coming onto the internet, and it was the first of these initial public offerings. And so, anyhow, Mark plays a really big history in that. And then he was also one of the first investors in Facebook and all these social media applications. So he's really a legend. And I'm not
You've
sure
said that you have said that you fell into this. It's not the first time we've heard this from entrepreneurs. Certainly not the first time I've heard it. But there had to be something. There had to be at some point that you were going to school that you said, "Okay, I've got these grades. I've got this. I've got it. I'm trying. This is the direction I'm going to choose."
Yeah, I think the moment of my choosing of what I wanted to do. So I was at business school, and everybody was trying to get careers, getting jobs at Procter and Gamble and Arthur Andersen. That's another company you probably don't know. They had a more scandalous ending.
Yes, more scandalous.
So everyone was trying. Everyone was trying to get a job with one of these big firms, and I had really fallen in love with doing nice things on the computers. I had a 486 computer with Windows 3.1, and I had Microsoft Word, which was this brand new word processor that you could choose fonts and templates and stuff. And I made beautiful presentations and beautiful documents. And I really was falling in love with using computers and feeling empowered with computers. And so I wanted to do something in computers. We didn't call it digital then. I said, I want to do something with computers. And so I looked for a job where I could do something with computers, and ended up with my first job out of university with an MBA and a bachelor's degree at a startup. And startups at that time weren't a thing yet, but there was an entrepreneur not too far from the university who had a previous business. It was still operating, which was we were in Canada, so he was redistributing American computer components to retailers, like from resellers at the time. So he was like a reseller, but he wanted to do something neat in this field of multimedia, because again, the internet was not yet really a thing. But what was a thing was people putting CD-ROM drives on their computers and seeing rich graphics on their computers. And so I got excited by that too, because that's what I was starting to experience in what I was doing at school. And so he got excited about hiring me. He hired me for pennies. I think I was making $20 an hour with a master's degree, but I was excited. And we were starting from scratch. I was employee number one, and we were researching things, and eventually we came around to a business idea, which was that we would create a magazine on a CD, the first magazine on a CD-ROM. And we hired a developer who was a hippie-ish kind of developer, and we hired a graphic designer who was really talented and knew how to use all the Adobe tools at the time. And the development platform was in what would ultimately become Flash, but it was called Macromedia Director at the time. And I learned to code, and I learned to burn CDs at a time when a CD burner was like a $3,000 machine.
Wow.
And all like in the really, really early days of a lot of this computing technology, I had to get a Mac because it was the only way to have portable disks. And again, then a portable hard disk with 1 gigabyte was $1,000. And so, but a gigabyte was huge because the CD-ROM only held 650 megabytes. So you had all this space. And we started working towards building a CD-ROM based magazine. It was going to be about multimedia, so it was kind of this circular reference, like you would buy a CD-ROM magazine to inform you about what CD-ROMs that came out and you should buy, and it was family oriented. And we actually had, in the year and a little bit that I worked there, we had Disney interested in acquiring the company. We had Ziff Davis, which was a very big magazine publisher. They published all the computer magazines, interested. And they kind of had a little bit of a competitive battle. They eventually offered, I think it was $1 million US for the business, because they both wanted to buy the publishing platform and turn us into the production house. And the entrepreneur didn't want to sell it. And that turned out to be a very disappointing moment for me. He wanted $2 million. It seemed arbitrary. And it kind of went into a ditch at that point. So I started to look for another job. It was kind of my first disheartening, like exciting moment in business, and then followed by a disappointment when something was out of my hands. And
let's pause there for a second, because that's like, you know, what I'm interested in here is moments in careers, and that sounds like a pivotal one to me. That would have been your first time dealing with this kind of decision from an entrepreneur that you didn't necessarily agree with? Was it because
well, Shale, you and I went to the same summer camp that had a particular entrepreneur running it who we didn't agree with everything. So it wasn't the first time, but it wasn't the first time.
You know what I mean?
But it was the first time that counted. Yeah, it was the first time.
It was the first time that counted. That's exactly right. Yeah. We were kids at in the other area, but was it because it was too focused on, I mean, obviously you said it was a random kind of amount that you thought he was asking for. Was it because he was focused on the money that you were kind of disillusioned, or was it something besides that?
That's a really good question. As I reflect on it, this is very long ago, so my memories of it aren't vivid, but the way my emotions remember it was I was doing all the work. I mean, he put up the money and he paid for it, so I don't fault him for it. Was his property, but he wasn't really negotiating from any position of any objective valuation.
Like there was no educated. He wasn't taking an educated guess. He was like being.
No, they said we'll give you $1 million, and
he said I want
$2 million, and he threw them out of the office, and he got angry and he got emotional. And I think and he'd been emotional a number of times. Which thanks to the experience you and I had at the summer camp, I was able to deal with. I had already had my experience in dealing with an emotional entrepreneur, but I was very disappointed, and I realized that he wasn't going to make decisions that were consistent with the decisions that I would make. So I started to look for another job, and I found one. It wasn't hard at the time, I thought that thing had come to an end for me.
Okay. And you know, as we go through this and we watch your career kind of unfold, that is kind of something that has happened. You've been pretty good at knowing when things are over and when you want to move on to something else. And certainly, I guess the next step after this, and we continue learning, right? This is your first real experience in this kind of thing. And obviously back in the early 90s, you don't have a wife, you don't have a family.
I was engaged at the time. I was engaged,
I mean,
but yeah.
Exactly. But you know what I mean? There was no...
It didn't matter, yeah.
It didn't matter if you were making $20 an hour. It was like, this is what I'm trying to do. This is how I'm building my knowledge base, and I'm building my experience base. And that's where we were all basically there in our 20s. But the difference is when you left this job
Sorry, I was making. I said $20. I just remembered it was $12 an hour.
Yeah, I was going to say
$20
an
I remember
hour
my
is pretty
next
good for 1992.
Yeah, I remember the next job I got. They paid me $47,000 a year, and I was like, "Holy shit!
Yeah,
Wow,
Yeah.
I'm in it now.
Rolling in the money.
I'm in it now.
Woo! It was
Well, that was
crazy
30 years
money.
ago.
Yeah, it
So-
wasn't really. It was great compared to anything I'd ever made before.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
But so did you go? I mean, the next big step for you was obviously when Torstar came looking for you and hired you but before they had any digital presence anywhere.
Yeah,
And put
So
you,
I-
was that where you went to after that?
yeah. So
Okay.
when I decided I was going to leave that first place, I started looking in the newspaper for jobs because that's where jobs were published because there was no. It was in my future to build the way that people would find jobs
Correct.
on the internet still. So I didn't have time travel. So I looked in the newspaper and I saw that I looked in the Toronto Star and I saw that the Toronto Star was hiring for something called a marketing development specialist, and the job description said you'll be developing products, which was what I was doing, which was exciting. And they said that the requirement was that you had a business degree and have used and had experience using the internet. So I was like, yeah, I applied. They interviewed me.
They only asked for experience. They didn't ask for,
I
like,
had-
have you been on the internet? That's the
I was
criteria.
already not a good corporate fit. Like I had long hair. I didn't own I didn't own a nice suit. The one suit I owned was wrinkled. It didn't fit properly. But they took but they liked what I had to say. I came with passion about the internet. I came with passion about stuff. The hiring manager, he was also the publisher of a magazine they had called I Weekly that was struggling, and he asked me what I thought of it, and I had praise for it. And so he kind of liked me for that reason too. And so I was offered a 1-year contract to work at the Toronto Star to do this marketing role. And my first project was helping them launch the website of the Toronto Star. I didn't have one at the time that I joined. And in particular, my focus, because I was kind of hired in through the advertising department, this department that sold advertising.
Actually, let me just jump in for a sec, Tom. I just want to make sure there are people here that don't know the Toronto Star. So,
So it was the largest newspaper in the country at the time.
Exactly.
It was the largest newspaper in the largest city, and it had more readers than all the other newspapers combined.
And they brought you in with no experience to develop the online presence, which I guess in hindsight is pretty brave.
Yeah,
Extremely brave.
I guess. I mean, it was hard to find anybody, and nobody thought it was important. Like we look back and we say, "Oh, the internet's important." Nobody thought it was important.
Right.
The VP of marketing was like, "Man, we can wait another couple of years. I think there's no hurry." So, but here's something that's kind of like an interesting thing. So I'd been a newspaper reader my whole life. I'd had 2 business degrees, and I went there, and despite all that business education and experience as a newspaper reader, I found out in the first week on the job that 80% of the company's revenue came from selling advertising, and only 20% came from subscriber circulation. And I was blown away.
Yeah.
Right? It was like, oh yeah, I realize that there's advertising, and I realize it influences me, but I never realized it was that different. I thought I paid for the newspaper, and that's what covered it. And then I found out that they sell advertising. Mm-hmm. The size of the newspaper, like the news, was what they called the news hole. It's like when we lay out all the ads, we have some space left over. That's what we fill with news.
Oh, so, my God, that's hilarious. That's news to me. Right? So basically the advertising was obviously the most important part. And he filled in the rest with news. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So I learned that, and it was good that I guess I came in through the advertising department, not the editorial department, because advertising drove the organization. And my first project was to get the classifieds and career ads on the website the night that, permanently, but when the website launched. And the first night that the website launched, I was there. Like people, there was no digital ads, right? Like people weren't even sending the ads digitally. They were couriering film for the ads. And so to get them into the website, people had to retype the content of the ads so that we could have them on the website. And I was there getting repetitive stress injury because I was helping out, because it turned out we'd underhired by a huge amount because business was booming for the newspaper. There were pages and pages of career ads that needed to be rekeyed, and it was a tough launch, like any startup launch that you would see outside of a newspaper. Like there was demand for what we were doing. There was lots of work to be done. There was technical glitches, but it was a really, really exciting time, and I was thrilled to be there till like 2 a.m. in the morning.
I mean, I can just jump in personally on this one because I remember you. First of all, I remember you calling me and telling me go look in the go look in the paper, and you had this huge picture, I think on a quarter page, that you had been hired. It might have been after, like when you were put into.
It was much later.
Yeah.
They weren't putting my picture in the paper yet. But later on in my career, they put my picture in the paper.
But the thing is that this is a highly visible gig for a guy who's just starting out. And do you think that it was the passion that they were interested in, your passion for the media, that they were interested and hired you for, or do you think that it was the business degrees? Like, how do you mesh those two things?
A little bit of both. It was a little bit of both. I mean, at the end of the day, when you get hired because they like and want to work with the person that's there, and they believe that the person that's there has the qualifications to potentially succeed.
Yeah.
So there was the demand of all of those things. I had very good grades. I had some experience already in multimedia. I knew about the internet. I was excited about the Toronto Star. Like I guess this is too much about the branding, but I had been more of a reader of the competition as I grew up, the Globe and Mail, which was a bit more of a highbrow national newspaper. But the Star excited me because it was about entertainment and living in the city, and it was urban, and it was, and so it was almost like stepping into a different life for me, from the kind of elitist, smart guy into the adventurous.
It was an experience to read that before any kind of, and it's hard to talk about it now when you've got this reference point of internet presence for a newspaper now, which is where a lot of the attention is. At that point, the Star was the be all and end all for young upcoming urban. I remember waiting for it to come in the morning, opening it up, spending my time with it in the morning before I went to work, and then spending time with it after when I got home. Like, it was critical. It was completely geared to young up and coming liberal professionals, for the most part, and certainly in my experience, and it was by far the most popular paper in the country. That for sure.
Right. And I want to say, like, again, we forget the history, but it wasn't really political. It was known for being a liberal thing, but 99% of the content was kind of an interest, like the entertainment section, and what new homes were being built, and what cars were for sale, and the comics and the TV guide and the thing.
Right. Lifestyle based almost. Yeah.
Because people watch TV and they needed a paper publication to teach them to tell them what was on TV. So the newspaper was the Google of the time.
I like that.
And everybody spent time with it, and it was the main source of daily information that came out.
For sure. Did you have when you got to the Star and you started working in this environment, like I said, highly visible environment, and you were still young, you were still essentially in your mid-20s when you started there, maybe a little closer to your later 20s, but was there mentors? Was there people that you looked up to that you feel steered you in a direction that completely influenced your later projects?
Totally. I went from one mentor to, like, my career rose very rapidly through the organization, and I went from one mentor to the next. I became one mentor's protege after another. So my career went really fast. After my first 6 months there, they offered me a full-time job and a promotion, and they made me assistant manager of the department that had hired me. And so the manager was briefly my mentor, but there was some reorganization that took place. I'm not going to remember the timelines exactly, like within another 6 months. And so I was put in charge of this department after only being there for slightly over a year. And then my mentor became the director of the advertising department, which was the senior most person in the whole advertising department. That was 80% of the revenue. So I'm here with 1.5 years of experience, and I'm running the product development, which was also responsible for the pricing of all of the advertising that was 80% of the revenue of this Toronto Star. And it was quite a responsibility. It was exciting, but I didn't really know, like, I was still so young and naive. I didn't really appreciate the magnitude of all of this. And I would go into meetings and I wouldn't know who anybody there was. And so I would just speak my mind. And I would walk out and someone would say, do you know who you said you disagree? And do you know who was in that meeting? I'm like, no, who was that guy? And it's like, he's the vice president of marketing. He's the guy that your boss reports to, and he reports to the boss. I'm like, oh, I hope I hope nothing bad happened, but I didn't really, I didn't know enough.
Interesting career choice. Yeah. But this is the kind of thing, this is probably why you moved up so quickly, is because you were unafraid. And you've always been kind of, when it comes to this kind of stuff, certainly in my mind for you, one of the things I think about is that you are not risk averse. when it comes to this kind of contribution. You were young, you were cocky, which you should have been because you were very smart, and you ended up moving up very quickly, as you said. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that your passion drove you first, and then as you gain knowledge, and you're like a sponge, like I said, on a personal level with you when it comes to that stuff, and you really kind of anchored yourself as the demand, let's say, for internet access on and digital formats for all media started to grow in the late 90s. You started moving up quickly. That's probably when I remember seeing your picture in the paper, as far as the
so that first promotion would have gotten me my first picture in the paper, and maybe I reached out to you and I said, oh my God, look at the business section.
It was awesome. It was awesome.
I had to pose for a picture. I had to get my hair cut. I had to put on a tie.
It was very exciting. So let's just touch on the mentors. Can you give some names of people that you were speaking to and how they influenced you, even if it's a little bit?
Yeah. So the first director of advertising I reported to was the guy who hired me. His name is Andrew Go. I haven't stayed in touch with him, so I hope he's still well and alive. Although I know his son, who's also named Andrew Go, who's doing well and is definitely alive. And he basically guided me. He was a very smart, very relaxed guy, and he would often doze off in meetings in the afternoon. That just goes to show kind of the personalities of people who could rise. But he was totally worthy of the respect that he commanded, because he was knowledgeable about everything that went on, and he too saw himself as an entrepreneur, and so pushed for innovation. And then he ended up, I think he ended up going to start an entrepreneurial division in the organization, and so someone else, a guy by the name of Frank Bergeau, was promoted to the director of advertising, and he was the one who I ended up reporting to really closely, and he was a very analytical and deliberate individual, and so he really brought out in me, like, he put me in charge of all of the analysis, because while he liked the analysis, I was the one with the mathematical capability and the computer expertise to do it. Sure. It was the very early days of data mining and data analysis, and the company had bought this data warehouse, which was a brand new innovation at the time, and so I was responsible for building the data warehouse and using it and generating the reports and analyses from it, and he really supported me in that, and so I had this mentor who provided me with the resources to build this thing and expose what we could learn from it, and that became a very big part of what I did for the next couple of years. I was still launching internet services for the company, but I was doing it backed by data, and I was also supporting all of the print advertising, pricing, and promotion, and marketing. So I went through that stage, and then the company hired a new vice president of marketing who saw what was going on and quickly hired me to work for him. So I was raised up again, and I can't remember what my job. Oh, I think I was manager of business development. I had no idea what business development was, but I was the manager of it. And because they needed the title inflation's important in big
That's correct. Well,
so
as long as it sounds good, Tomer. I mean, that's.
Well, I'm going to tell you, throughout the rest of my career, I didn't know what my job was until they gave me a title of president, and then it was clear to me. But so I did this manager of business development title, working for him, and working for marketing meant I was in charge of the circulation marketing as well, although I never did get terribly close to that. But he came from an amazing marketing and research background, and so he taught me a lot about marketing. I'll tell you very, very quickly one of the stories he told me. He came from I'm trying to remember the name. So one of Procter and Gamble, from Lever Ponds,
sure,
I think.
Yep.
And they were a big, and he was one. So he had been a brand manager, and I think he had been in charge of their cake brands. So Sara Lee, not Sara Lee. What are the brands of the cakes that you can cook? One is Duncan Hines.
McCain's.
Yeah.
No, keep going. Well,
McCain's,
anyhow, this.
Yeah.
Betty Crocker. Okay, that's it. So he was in charge of Betty Crocker.
Good job,
and his
Mel.
competitors, and his competitor was Duncan Hines. And he said we all did the research. And what came back from it was all women who bought these products, and what they all said was that they wanted the cake to be moist. So we at Betty Crocker, we changed all of our marketing to emphasize, look at how moist our cakes was. He said, but do you know what the bastards at Procter and Gamble did? They made their cakes moister.
No.
And they killed us because
Oh man.
advertising is one thing, product is another. And that really,
Yeah.
really impressed upon me. It was like the early days of realizing who was going to win in technology. Like Procter and Gamble it was labeled as a marketing company, but it was a science company. It was an engineering company. They engineered antiperspirant and toothpaste and cakes that are moist, but they did the market research. Yes, they ran competent ads and everybody thought it was all about the advertising, but it's about the science, right? Like the Tide did get your clothes clean, right? The Cascade did get your dishes clean. Crest did help prevent cavities. So this was that was like a really important lesson that I learned from him.
Well, I think it's an incredible lesson. And again, I'm all about the moments, and for me, that would have been a huge moment where you saw the difference between the marketing and the product, and that at the end of the day, and we see this in the service industry as well, that you can sit and spout. And Mel is our marketing coordinator, so this is what she does all day. But you can spout about how amazing we are, but we focus on, and I can only speak again for Pace, is the product that we're delivering. So that when she does do that, that she's coming from a place of knowledge and
integrity. Right. So I think the difference is, you can run an ad saying your cakes are moist. Someone's going to go buy your cake. They're going to eat it. It's not going to be moist. They're never going to buy it again, right? Another mentor later on in my career actually told me that a very similar lesson. He said, you never advertise your product before it's good, because all you then do is inform everybody who listened to the advertising that you have a shitty product.
Right.
So it was like, and you really want this alignment of product.
So that is an amazing, an alignment between marketing and understanding the fact that the science and the product is what ultimately is going to,
right.
It's the client experience that's going to,
Exactly.
And I'm thrilled in the fact that you've actually used the word,
integrity.
Sorry, thank you. Integrity. I was thinking integration. Integration. Well, we didn't say integration. It was integrity, because it's in my notes, and it's something that certainly, as obviously you're one of my closest friends. We've been friends a long time, but integrity is at the top of your list as things when someone talks about you that I think about. Was that something that you found as you moved forward that was became more important? Or that you were finding as you rose the ladder that you were having to compromise that integrity a little bit to be able to continue to climb? Is that something that you encountered?
I'm Michael Chagru, president of Pace Technical. For over 20 years, we've been the leader in managed and co-managed IT for businesses in the GTA. If you want a proactive, process-driven approach to IT, we can help. Our Complete Care service eliminates issues and gets businesses the most out of their IT investments. We provide help desk support for quick response when you have issues, proactive maintenance to keep systems running, enterprise-grade security to keep you safe, and IT strategy for better business decisions. Book a free 20-minute IT gauge at pacetechnical.com today.
Well, I somehow had developed this view that your integrity should never be compromised, that it was paramount, and so I was never really prepared to compromise my integrity. And in this early stage of my career, I was reasonably pleased. Like, I was working for people who generally had integrity. They weren't flawless, but they weren't dishonest. They were honest. They were limited. They were finite. Maybe a little over promoted in some of these cases, but generally with high degrees of integrity. And I love that about the organization at the time. And I felt really proud to be involved with it because I was working for bosses who had a lot of integrity, it seemed to me at the time. So I don't know, do we continue the journey?
Let's continue the journey. No, I wanted to, because you said integrity, and I wanted to make sure that we touched on that because it's going to come up later.
Right. So I then, so then, I got a little bored with my job, and I had ideas for things that I wanted to build inside the digital department with digital, and and things were moving too slowly for me in the newspaper division. And so I told people, I think I'm gonna leave because I'm limited in what I can do here. But I was a rising star, and again, this news got up to the publisher, president of the company, and he went off and thought, and he said, you know what, we're going to create a digital division, and you're too young to be put in charge of it, Tomer, but you'll get a job in it, and you'll be able to pursue not just the one idea that you have, but lots of ideas that you have. So it was very rewarding.
Is this John Hondrickman at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. It was John Hondrick at the time.
Big guy.
Yeah. And he put somebody else in charge of it who also had an interesting history, who was also enthusiastic about the internet, older though, and not as well connected. And that was kind of the first time where some things started to kind of splinter for me. So a lot of great things happened in that division. I had taken the careers online. We tried to turn it into a real business, and we ultimately merged with our competitor's career site to create a site called workopolis.com, which became for 15 years the leading career site in Canada.
Right. Yeah. Good job.
And ultimately was sold to Indeed, which is the largest career site in the world. And so it became a very big and very profitable business very quickly, very highly valued. It was actually worth more than the public company was.
Wow.
But we only owned half of it, so it became worth a lot very quickly. And it was based off a lot. So there was this exciting stuff that was happening, but it was not the first time I'd seen my boss plateau. Like, you know, I talk about these wonderful moments with these bosses in the early days, but many of them somehow plateaued, and, you know, and not pleasant things happened to them. Alcohol may have become a factor in their lives, or something where they derailed. And this boss that I had at that division derailed, and I again said, I can't come in anymore. Like, it was too miserable working it. So I said, I'm taking my vacations just to stay away from my boss, to the HR person. And they said, okay, like, they did some research. They realized I wasn't the only person, and they ended up terminating him. And this was at the time that the .com bubble had popped. So of course, depression was kind of understandable. There was a digital division. We had no ideas of what to do. Valuations were destroyed. And there was a new
So
CEO
this was, just to give people a point of reference. It's
2011.
2000. No, this was 2000.
2001.
2001. Yeah, I was going to say 2011.
Around September 11th, right?
Right.
Around September 11th, 2001. So like a super depressing time. The .com bubble had burst. Terrorists had flown planes into buildings. Like, we were all completely, what's the word for it?
Oh, and by the way, you were working at the tallest building, almost one of the tallest buildings in the city.
It wasn't a tall building, but it was scary. It was scary. Like,
sure.
I remember on 9/11 day, the Star ran a special, like, 8-page edition in the afternoon because everybody was dismayed, and they got it downtown. They shipped it downtown, and I was standing on the corner of the street handing out a special, like, we'd never done a special edition in my life, but you read about it, like, extra, read all about it, like, from the ancient days. It was like, here was a day where I wasn't saying extra, read all about it. I didn't have to say a word, right? I was like, here's a special edition. What's going on? And so like, the company mobilized instantly to try to inform people what was going on. With a special, like, 8-page ad-free free supplement, because it was so traumatic. But zooming back out, a new CEO was coming into the company as well, and I recommended dismantling the division that I worked in because we just had nothing that was of excitement for us anymore, other than continuing to manage the established brands, and we had just too many people in the division because we weren't doing new things. And so by the way, I had a title there that I can't even remember. I think I was Director of Interactive Strategy or some silly name like that. So I'd become a director, which was what, and then I became the Managing Director of Corporate Development. I had no idea what a Managing Director was, and I had no idea what corporate development was, but that was my job. And that was a very senior job. I reported directly to the CEO of the corporation, the company that owned the Toronto Star. So I wasn't even in the Toronto Star anymore. I was Managing Director of Corporate Development of Torstar Corporation. And that was a corporate strategy role. And I was responsible for mergers and acquisition evaluation and figuring out where the company should be headed. And I was the one doing the presentations. I was senior at this point now. I'd grown up as a businessman. And I was responsible for making the presentations and recommendations as to what the company should do with its money. It was a very profitable company, lots of free cash flow, wanting to grow, wanting to invest in things. And so the board of directors kept asking, well, should we buy more newspapers? Should we get into television? Should we get into magazines? Should we get into radio? Should we get into billboards? What should we get into? And I did all this strategic analysis, and making a long story short, after a couple of years in that role, I did, like, we've got to get back into the internet. Although the .com valuations were down and Amazon was hardly worth anything and Pets.com had disappeared and everything, the fundamentals were growing. The number of people accessing the internet was growing like crazy. The number of people with high-speed internet was growing like crazy. The amount of time people were spending on the internet was growing like crazy, and I could see it. And here it comes, and it's going to affect every part of the newspaper business. It's going to affect national advertising. It's going to affect local advertising. It's going to affect classified advertising. It's going to affect the news that people read. That was everything that the newspaper actually was. And so I said, it's coming at us like a missile, and we have got to get into this thing.
Yeah.
And it was a very hard sell. Despite the fact, I first had this amazing deck that was like an inch thick, showing all these statistics that I summarized to you, and I couldn't really get the senior management team to read it. The CEO had read it, but the rest of the senior management team, because we had these executive groups.
So why do you think that is, Tomer? Why do you think that your management team wouldn't read it?
One, they were very busy. But I'll actually get to it. So
okay.
So this is part of this story. This is a great story, actually. So they hadn't read the first deck. It was too thick. So the CEO said, you know what, Tomer, come back at the next meeting. It's 2 weeks from now. Make the deck smaller. There's just too much data. They're overwhelmed with it. They're very busy. And so I reduced it to like 10 points, which was the points I just made to you. Like, look at this. It's a rocket ship in time spent. It's a rocket. And this was around the time that BlackBerry was kind of, the iPhone hadn't even been invented yet. This is 2004, but every senior executive in the world now has a BlackBerry, and it's called a Crackberry, and everybody's addicted to it. And so I have this small presentation. Everybody had a chance to read it, and I make the 10-minute presentation of it at the executive group meeting, and they're still not interested. They're like, and I ask, or the CEO asks, like, what's the issue here? And Tomer, we heard everything that's in your deck. We heard it before. We heard it before almost 10 years ago when all these fancy consultants came in and they told us the internet was going to destroy the newspaper, and it didn't. So what's different this time, right? And it was a bit of a rhetorical question. It's like, we've heard that the sky is falling before, but there was something and they were all, nobody was listening to me anymore, because already this thing that we're all addicted to, the phone, which only executives had at the time, which was this BlackBerry, which was a phone, they're all typing. And so they said, what's different this time? And here I was, unfiltered again, because I'd lost my temper. I said, if you would just put down your mobile wearable computer that you're using to connect wirelessly to the internet right now, you would see what has changed. And most of them still didn't get it, but the CEO got it. I saw the blood rush out of his face, and he's like, holy fuck. We're all sitting here connected to the internet in computers that we wear. We didn't even notice it, right? It was invisible. We've all become permanent addicts to the internet. We didn't even see that the internet is here, but we're all sitting here using the internet, paying money to use the internet, just like it says in Tomer's slides. Yeah. And we can't see it. It had become ubiquitous and invisible. And so I and the woman who had helped me prepare the presentation were dismissed from the executive board while they went to discuss it.
Unceremoniously dismissed from the room?
They said, go and wait while we discuss this. It was kind of interesting now that I reflect on it. Like, I wasn't a member of the team, right? I was still the junior kid. They were the senior people. Yeah. And I had presented something so controversial that they needed to discuss it without me in the room. And we sat there and we waited. And it was like 7 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night, 9. We just sat in my office waiting for hours, and nobody came. And we didn't know what to make of it. Then finally, like at 9 o'clock, the CEO comes in. He says, "Didn't your boss come and tell?" At one point, he had put me with another boss who was in no way a mentor, in no way an interesting person. I kept forgetting that I worked for him. He was
right.
And he didn't come and talk to us 2 hours prior when he was supposed to. Just as the example of the kind of person he was. So the CEO came in and he said, "Yeah, we're going to go ahead with it. So we're going to create a digital. We're going to create a digital division."
Yeah.
And we were fuming, me and this woman who had put this together. They kept us sitting here waiting without anything, and we
ridiculous.
So we were fuming. So I wasn't exactly pleased when he came and told me, but it was fine. Like the next day we came together, and I sat in his office, and he says, so what do you think we should do? And I said, well, like, as I told you in the deck, this is super important. It's like the very existence of the company weighs on this. We got to get somebody really, really good, really experienced, who can actually create this new division and make it work. He said, well, I'm not that convinced. How would you like it?
I'm convinced, but I'm not that convinced.
We don't need someone that good. You can do the job.
That good.
And I was like, I couldn't believe it, because I really thought you needed someone with much more expertise and experience, someone who knew how to hire lots of people, someone who had experience building these types of businesses.
Yeah.
And he said, you do it. And
so what did you look for in those people that you were hiring? Like, what was it that you were looking for? Obviously, you were going by the seat of your pants on this. You've been asked to start a new division. Just for context, you're barely 30 at this point. Like, you're 31, 32, right?
It's 2004, so I'm 34.
34. Still, you know, for the level that you've achieved at that point.
Well, this was it. It was like, I told them this was the future of the company, and they said, we don't think so. Here, you take the keys to this thing. But I knew they were handing me the keys to the future of the company, and that this was serious. And then, you know, in this whole process, the HR person told me how disappointed she was that I was taking this role, because she foresaw, you know, she said, oh, you're on your way to being CEO, but you need to be a publisher of a newspaper. I thought maybe you'd be publisher of some suburban newspaper that we had. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that I'm taking the job that's going to lead to CEO if there's a future to this.
Correct.
So, but I guess this is the point. Nobody there saw it, right? For whatever reason, maybe the CEO had a glimmer of it, but everybody else thought it's going to take forever for the internet.
They trusted you enough to hand you the keys to what at the time was still the biggest newspaper in the country. And
just the web, like it was just the website.
This is what I mean. They're handing you the keys to the digital.
We think of, but they didn't think that was important. That would be like me handing you the keys to the lawnmower.
Okay.
Right? Or like the keys.
It didn't really matter to them.
The keys to the moped. They didn't see that this was going to be big. The newspaper mattered.
Yeah.
Right.
This other thing was small. So we were thinking about these things, but they thought, hey, if you think this is important, go ahead, go do something with it. So
let me go back to that. What kind of people are you looking for? Like, what were you looking for?
So I had this I had this strategy that was, okay, we need to do four things, broadly speaking. We need to address national advertising, we need to address local advertising, we need to address classified advertising, and we need to address news. And so we thought, how do we tackle these? How do we tackle these things? It took years to get to the answers to some of these things, but we said, well, to tackle the news, we don't need to create digital specific news, but we need to get our news on digital. So we needed to create a publishing platform because everything was really ugly. So I started by hiring a technology team to create this, what turned out to be a company that would not only publish the Toronto Star's websites and all its newspapers, but Rogers, which is the largest cable company, and now I think the largest mobile company in Canada, bought 50% to publish all of their media titles. They have radio stations, they had magazines, so they ended up becoming a part of that in time. This took years. But we started a technology company for that. We took over Toronto.com, which was one of the portfolio assets from the earlier internet career that I had there, and tried to make it a local advertising solution. We partnered with a startup from Silicon Valley that was called Live Deal that was doing free classified ads with paid upgrades. It was founded by one of the early employees of eBay. And we started an online advertising company for national advertising that became known as Olive Media Canada, which it took us time to discover this, but we realized on the internet you can see where the viewer is of the ads, and so you can put a specific ad for them there. You couldn't do that in print, right? So this was all really, it was called geo-targeting at the time. And I had this idea from my study of Canadian advertising, which is they rebroadcast American shows, but simultaneously substituted the ads through the cable providers. So I said, oh my God, we can actually do this on the internet. So we went out and we reached out to like the New York Times and women.com and all these really popular sites at the time and said, give us all your Canadian impressions. Every time a Canadian comes and looks at your website, send the ad delivery to our server, and we will sell the ads. And so we built this giant Canadian advertising sales company. So we needed different people for. I'm getting to the answer to your question.
Okay.
We needed very, very, very different people for each of these businesses that were not newspaper people at all, because none of these businesses needed any skills that anybody in the newspaper had. So it was kind of this very radical departure. One was someone who'd sold a lot of internet advertising in their life. One was we never really found the right person for it, but someone who could run this classified business. One was a technology company which needed a visionary technology architect to figure out how to solve these problems that hadn't yet been solved. And so the company Torstar Digital actually became a portfolio of different companies at different stages in their life with different successes. And so I became a leader of leaders because I had to put a leader in charge of each and every one of these businesses. There were other businesses that we got into at the time. We ran an advertising technology company that we acquired called iReturn Marketing. We ran a deal site that was like Groupon, but that was called WagJag. We ended up buying one in French Canada. That was doing very well. So I ended up with a portfolio after being there for 6 or 7 years of, I think, like 9 companies that reported to me, most of which we'd either founded within Torstar or bought when they were very small. There was one that the iReturn Marketing that I mentioned that we bought when it was more established, but they were bought essentially as startups or they were developed as startups. And we ended up with this big portfolio. We had the career site, the local site, Toronto.com. We had the deal sites. We had the advertising sales business. We had the technology company.
Were you still engaged at this point with the job? So, were you still finding it interesting? Were you being,
okay, so
you've said this a couple
where
of
the
times.
Transition. Yeah.
Yeah.
So all of these businesses, I had somehow, again, almost subconsciously, in one of the early meetings in the early days of this company, I was meeting with my teeny tiny senior management team at the time, and I said, we have a goal. We want to be the great Canadian digital media company. I knew we were in digital. I knew we were media, and I wanted to be great Canadian because that seemed like the space to play in. And that became a rallying cry for every one of the businesses, right? Part of the great Canadian digital media company. But at this point in time that you're asking about, like years later, we had kind of achieved it, right? Like we were doing a couple of $100 million a year in revenue.
Yeah.
We had like 400 employees. We were succeeding, and everybody was trying to imitate us, but it was hard for them because they came late or they just didn't have the brand. We had built some really powerful brands in this time. But I wanted to get to so I was also getting through a transition. Like the leaders had become amazing. They didn't really need me anymore. I wasn't fortunate.
Which is where, as an entrepreneur,
I was lonely.
Which is, it gets lonely, but it's also what you want. You wanted to mentor people into the place where
I had
they're
succeeded.
being able to do it. Exactly.
I had succeeded in putting myself out of being needed.
That's correct.
Right now, I'll give you another really great. So early in my career, someone gave me another piece of advice, which was really useful in getting promoted. They said, if you ever make yourself indispensable, you also make yourself unpromotable. And so I always knew, find someone to take over from you so that you can proceed to the next step. Because if you're stuck turning the crank of the machine that you just made,
you're not going to grow.
You got nowhere to go. You're there. So find someone else to turn the crank of the machine that you just made. And I got quite good at it. That's why I became this leader of leaders. But I wanted to face the next challenge, which I thought was, it's time. Like Canada there's a problem. The internet's getting so big and so global that none of these Canadian-only businesses are actually going to survive. Like as Google enters the market, as all these national companies, as Facebook enters the company, nothing of a Canadian scale is going to be big enough to survive. There's no protections, so there's no local barriers to entry. So I appealed to the company to go global. Also at this time, we lost the CEO who had been my mentor and put me in this position, and there had been some political shenanigans, and the new CEO had much less vision. He had been a chief financial officer, a finance guy his whole life, so he wasn't a businessman. He was an accountant, and he didn't have the vision for this at all. And also there was a lot of politics inside the organization. So he was a man of integrity, but not vision. And there was a lot of politics inside the organization. Suddenly there was this $200 million division, and everybody else wanted a piece of it. So everybody made the case to slice and dice the division and sacrifice portions of it to the traditional print divisions. They wanted their websites back. They wanted their technology back. They wanted their ad sales back. They wanted their career section back. That was the way that they framed it in their minds. And so I found myself being refused the resources to develop new ideas that would be international, and spending all my time just trying to defend my turf from being sliced and diced. And it was a really ugly moment because this was my life's work, and I could see that it was going to be taken away from me. The new CEO didn't deny it when I challenged him with it. He said that was in the cards, and that if I made my division smaller, there would still be a job for me, and maybe we could see what would happen. So I quit.
I remember that.
To walk out with my head held high.
Yeah.
Again, that integrity. And I remember this like it was yesterday when you did it, because I think that there were a lot of people who this goes to show you that people have different perspectives than you have when you're dealing with this kind of stuff, is that you've achieved this pinnacle of your career. You've done all this incredible stuff. You've helped to influence the growth of digital presence in Canada and now going globally, and you walked away from it. And that was something, there must have been a changing, something that that obviously you've already gone through with us what would have pushed you over the edge. Was there some kind of aha moment? Did you have some personal epiphany that?
You know what it was? No, it was a terrible 9-month period of my of me getting ready for work in the morning and hearing the phrase, "I hereby resign effective immediately," wanting to come out of my throat. Anger, turning to alcohol at the end of the day. Miserable, right? Trying to shield my leaders from what was actually going on so that they did not become discouraged. So it was a slow, torturous thing. I became depressed. It was really awful. So by the time that this had become crystal clear, I just felt like I needed to quit. Like I remember there was one moment where I had put together a small proposal, kind of like I realized now it was a desperate plea. I said, just give me access to $1 million to try to do some startup in the company while I continue to run this division for you. That was nothing to the company. And let me create Torstar Digital Ventures with $1 million of seed capital.
Yeah.
And the CEO came back. He didn't even let me present it to the board of directors. He came back. He said, well, they thought really hard about it and they really value you, but the answer is no. And I remember I stood up and I felt heart palpitations, right? It was, the words didn't mean anything. And here I am, I'm about to die of a heart attack from watching this. And so that's when I knew I had to leave the company because I would die if I stayed there. I would wither, I would literally die. I could feel it. It was my life's work. It was stuff that I was passionate about. So I quit. And in a very distressed moment. And the first role that I took out of there, it was kind of like out of the frying pan and into the fire. It was something that I was ill-suited to do with someone who I didn't quite understand, and they didn't understand me. And so it was a terrible failure. And while that was happening, I had a tragedy in my family that was also distracting.
Right.
It was a stroke followed by a suicide. It was just really, really horrible. And so I really fell into, I went through the very depressing period in my life, and I kind of
let's pause there for a second, because I think it's important to address this, that you've had this arc in your career that is almost unheard of. And still the humanity that you saw tragedy, that, and this, we're talking about your dad here, that underwent this horrible stroke, and that obviously affected his mental well-being, and it ultimately ended with his suicide. And listen, we all know that I have also had to deal with a similar thing my entire career as well. But this kind of thing, and you've already said, you've been very open with the fact that you were in a very dark place.
Yeah.
So was there something in that dark place that took you from that showed you a little tiny glimmer of light? And the reason I'm asking you this question is because you ended up and I want to talk about this because this is where people are going to be really interested. You ended up basically becoming an evangelist of something that you heartedly, with all of your passion, with all of your business knowledge of 30 years, you became an evangelist for Bitcoin. Right. And so give us a little impression about how that came about.
Yeah. Okay. So in my darkest moments, I was really desperate. It's not that I was desperate for a job or desperate for money. I was desperate, I think, for meaning and a sense of self-esteem, because I had identified as Tomer Strolight, president of Torstar Digital, for 7 straight years of my life. It was my identity, and I quit. I ceased to be who I was. And I didn't realize how devastating that would be. But my very identity was erased, and I needed to rebuild a new identity. And I thought my first start went nowhere. And then I was kind of rescued into another job where there were people that I knew because they had been partners of Torstar Digital's, and they liked me, and I was doing private equity again. But a lot of the same things were happening where I wasn't really getting to spread my wings and be creative anymore. And I was starting to become fearful and starting to accept, you know what, maybe I'm not going to get a chance to spread my wings again. Maybe I just need to find a place where I can earn money to take care of my family.
Take care of your family, because the kids are getting older at that point, and they're heading off to school, and
they needed more help, and there was lots of stuff, and that was really heartbreaking, because here I was about to compromise my integrity, like asking about compromising my integrity,
which has been so important to you for 30 years, right? And now you're faced with a choice that that people our age do have, right? Is that you start to realize that integrity is not black and white. It's never black and white. It seems like it when you're younger, but there's shades of gray, and these are the things I think that we're starting to, that I'm at least in you as a friend of yours, was starting to see at that point.
Yeah. So an interesting thing happened, which was Bitcoin. While I was in charge of doing a private equity business for one of Canada's largest financial companies, so people would come and pitch me businesses for like 10 years. I was doing investments, and so people were coming and pitching me businesses. And I always had this joke, because people would come with a PowerPoint, and that's all they had. This was their business idea. And they say, so what do you think my business is worth? And I would joke with them, there's somewhere between zero and all the money in the world. and they found that highly unsatisfying.
Sure.
It sent a message, right? It said and I came across this new idea called Bitcoin. This was in 2013 that someone had directed me to. It was encapsulated in a single white paper, which I now have printed in a large format, artwork behind me. And I read this thing, and I was like, oh my God, this thing is either zero or all the money in the world. No fucking joke.
Right.
This is brilliant. I didn't fully understand it. There was stuff I needed to learn about cryptography and peer-to-peer networks, but I could see this thing was something that was independent. It was not a company. It was not led by anybody. In fact, at this point in time, its creator, who was some pseudonymous individual, had already disappeared. It receded into the shadows, and so it was running by itself. And it was really, and I was talking to the people who'd introduced me to it, and I was just finding myself really, really caught up in it. I had recommended to the company that I was working at, let's take a stake in this and let's build businesses in it. And they were like, no, it looks like it's too dark and dangerous. It has something to do with drugs.
Yeah, there's nobody in charge. What are you talking about? There's nobody in charge.
So I took a couple of other jobs. Like they were the other company that was invested in Workopolis that now needed to be sold. So they had me liquidate the portfolio. And Workopolis needed liquidating, but it was having operational problems. So I went in to triage Workopolis. I went in as the chief technology officer. I knew what that job was, by the way. I finally
that was an easy one.
I knew what it was. Yeah. At this other job, I was an executive vice president. I think that was my title. I didn't know what an executive vice president was, but I was chief technology officer in a company that had really outdated technology, and so I got to learn a tremendous amount. We migrated from a data center to the cloud. We migrated from a monolithic architecture to a services-oriented, API-based architecture, and I got to lead all these things with a great team. So I was actually, I was sinking my teeth in, but the business was old and it was dying and it needed to be sold. So that was kind of sad because people kept quitting and we kept having to downsize. But the whole time I continued to be really, really interested in Bitcoin. And around 2017, there was a very seminal moment in Bitcoin's history where it was being attacked from within and from without. And this could have been the end of Bitcoin. It could have been the death of it. And it required a lot of communication about what was actually going on and clarification because things were complicated. And so I found myself during the day writing essays that went on Reddit, which was the Reddit Bitcoin community was at that point in time where all the Bitcoin activity and news and information happened. And I started writing essays almost every day about why I was in favor of this one important move that would protect Bitcoin's independence, not let it get taken over by corporations or enemies.
I'm going to stop you there because this is going to lead in directly to the next question, which I think is probably the most important question, is that you have, when you were talking about this, about what direction, and what Bitcoin is, because there was a certain amount of ignorance, not the least of which was me. Because, in 2016, you and I had a discussion about it, and I'm not going to go into details about it.
Oh, you don't want to?
Because I own a tech company. I know, it's a great story.
It's a great story.
Yeah, all right. Anyway, so...
We should tell the story because...
I don't want to know the story.
No. It's okay.
We got to tell the story.
It's fine. So, go ahead, Tom. You tell the story.
All right. So it turns out that because Bitcoin is kind of anonymous money that you can send over the internet, that some people had figured out something pretty nasty to do with it, which was something called ransomware. And if you let your computer get infected by kind of a virus, what this virus would do, it would encrypt the data on your hard disk. So it would make your data inaccessible to you, but retrievable to you if you paid a ransom for the password to decrypt your own data to the hackers.
As an IT company, we are very familiar with this.
Very
familiar with it.
You're very
We are now, but it wasn't really but in 2016, we are now. In 2016, it was
so in 2016, my friend Shale Wisman reached out to me and said, this thing happened to me on my computer, and the hackers want one Bitcoin, which is like worth $400.
For clarity, it was on Sharon's computer. For clarity.
Okay. All right.
Throw her under the bus.
Right. Throw her under the bus and I'll pay for it later. It's fine.
But the hacker, my computer and all my photos are on it and all my data is on it, and they want this password, and I want a Bitcoin. Can you get me one? I know you have some. And I'll never sell my Bitcoin. So as close a friend as Shale is, I had already fallen deeply, deeply in love with my Bitcoins, and I wasn't gonna. But I knew people who could get him one, so I helped Shale. He knew someone who was gonna. Yeah, he knew something.
Okay,
I helped Shale get a Bitcoin, and I said to Shale, it's only $400. Why don't you get one? Get two. Get one for yourself and one for the hacker.
Yeah.
Right.
Shale said no.
Because I am totally risk averse when it comes to this, not like him.
$400.
Well, I know. Right. This is why he's taking. Listen, just so we're on the same page, he's taking. You can see how gleeful he is about this.
Yes, I can.
Right, like you can see how gleeful he is about this. Please continue.
At the time of this recording, it was 400 Canadian dollars, by the
Correct.
way. Just so that we don't get. At the time of this recording, one Bitcoin is worth $64,795.
So if I would have spent the $400 4 years ago,
here's the thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so this sounds like a joke, but these are real moments of truth. That hacker didn't just teach you. He had two lessons to teach you. You only learned one. The first lesson was protect yourself with backups from hackers like me. So we actually joke on my podcast. We have this character we call Yuri the Russian hacker because that's obviously where this guy came from, and he's the inspiration. But he teach you lessons. And if you had actually taken the opportunity at that point in time to say, this thing isn't just evil, it's powerful. Maybe it's a technology, and technologies aren't evil or good; they're just powerful or weak. He would have taught you a very valuable lesson. There was a very valuable lesson to be learned there to say, if I take a stake in this powerful technology, there could be other forms of gains and other forms of learning for me.
Right.
So you learned how to defend yourself from this, but not how to participate in it.
I learned how to pay for it.
You.
I learned how to ransom it. I learned that you're right. I didn't take away. And listen, you're lucky that I'm a transparent guy, because I have no issue with saying that I was wrong, and I was wrong. of course, I can't spend $64,000 now trying to
you don't have to buy a whole. I'm not telling anybody to buy a whole Bitcoin. You can buy. They break down. You can buy 1/100 millionth of a Bitcoin. So the smallest unit's not even worth $1. It's not even worth a cent.
Right.
You got a long way to go. Turning back to it's great that we got off on this.
No. Here's what I wanted to steer you to. I wanted to steer you to this series of articles on Medium.com.
Okay.
That you have written. And they are groundbreaking. I'm just going to give you my personal stake in this because I read them when they came out. Obviously, I have you on Facebook, and I was able to look at them. And then when we started talking about this podcast, you're like, okay, go back and look at them. And here's specifically these two intro ones. And I was absolutely absorbed by the things that you were saying because you've made these things basically 2 to 3 minute reads that gave people, and there are tons of people on this podcast now, Tom, that still don't know what Bitcoin is. Right. So first of all, go look for Tomer on Medium.com because the articles are amazing. But give us a breakdown on what it is.
So very recently, like literally in March of this year, I'd been encouraged to share my knowledge about Bitcoin. I've been passionate about it for all this time. We almost went through my whole life story, but there's a gap there. But let's skip over it because I know.
Let's skip over the gap. Yeah.
Let's skip over the gap. And I'm now full time dedicated to enjoying Bitcoin, living the Bitcoin life, educating people about Bitcoin. And I'm a very good writer. I have this ability to be concise in my writing, which you might not guess from listening to how verbose I might talk. But writing gives you the opportunity to edit harshly. And so I wanted there were all these wonderful, magical things about Bitcoin that people had no idea what it was. It's not like anything you've ever seen before. It's not a company. It's not an entity that is run by human beings. It's this autonomous entity that exists out there in cyberspace. It has all these really cool functions and capabilities. It can withstand. It survived all of these attacks. It's indestructible. It's inviolate. It has this incredible integrity. And I needed to share these ideas with people. So I announced on one of my groups that I was going to be writing these short articles. I'd call them Why Bitcoin. They'd be accessible to newcomers. But secretly, I knew I also wanted them to be smart and impress longtime Bitcoiners because I wanted to be embraced by the community and I wanted to start to become known in the community. And so I started writing these. I said, and so I received a very enthusiastic response from the group. They gave me like 140 ideas for different titles, which were very pedestrian, typical things. And so I sat down to write one of these things. And I was kind of stuck because I didn't have anything original to say about it. It was boring. It was very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Pedantic?
Mechanical. Right? Like it's not exciting. And so I after my first attempt, I didn't succeed in writing an article. I went to sleep that night. And then suddenly, like, I woke up at 2 a.m. in the morning and I had the first article. It had come to me in a dream, right? It had come to me in my sleep from my subconscious.
All the best ideas do.
Come that way. Yeah.
I grabbed my phone and I wrote it. And it's the first article in the series. It's called Why Choose Bitcoin? And the basic idea behind it is the fact that you can ask the question, why should I choose Bitcoin? Is the remarkable feature about Bitcoin. Like, you don't get asked to choose the dollar. It's mandated, right? It's told to you by the government. It's legally required that you use the dollar. Yeah. Bitcoin is a voluntary currency that needs to earn your choice. And that's why it's going to succeed, because it's going to continue to get better and better and better to earn as many people's choice as possible. It's a living thing. It can be modified. It can improve. It was really good at the time that it came out. Whereas the dollar continues to be shoved down your throat by people who know that they're forcing it on you. So they keep making it worse and worse and worse. There's more inflation. There's negative interest rates.
That was my real takeaway from this series of articles. I'll be honest with you, was the control part of it. Was that there is no control over Bitcoin, and the government specifically, and certainly the global bureaucracy in general, controls currency. And they say, we're going to print this much, we're going to spend this much, we're going to do this. You're obligated to pay this. You're obligated to use this money. But in Bitcoin, there is nothing like that. Nobody controls it.
The rules are the rules. There's nobody in charge. And so it's a fair game. It's a game of rules, not rulers. There are no rulers in Bitcoin, which is it's a really precious thing. And so I then found my stride. If we're going back to the articles, the second one came to me kind of suddenly while I was walking in the forest. It was about, I'll tell this story quickly if you don't mind. I'm walking in the forest and I'm realizing, here I am in Canada, and here are all these old trees. These trees are older than Canada. What is Canada? These trees would laugh at the idea. Canada, someone drew a map of the world. It's not the real world. It's a map of the world. There's a difference between the map and the terrain. And then someone drew lines on that map and said, this is Canada. But it doesn't really exist in reality. What exists are the rules of the laws of nature. And these trees don't care if they're in Canada or the United States. They need sunlight. They need nutrients. They need... And it occurred to me, and this is how Bitcoin is built. Bitcoin isn't built on the rules of any country. It's built on the rules of physics. And so that was the second article that I wrote, why Bitcoin's rules are based on the laws of physics, which got me to realize that Bitcoin is forever, because Bitcoin will keep working as long as the laws of physics remain unchanged.
Yeah, and
if the laws of physics ever change, everything ends.
Everything else changes. And it's such a great, actually, it's a great place for us to end this, because you know, I think one of the last articles you wrote on it was, you know, why Bitcoin is a revolution, and, you know, why it's revolutionary. And it was again, you did 2 to 3 minutes, which is basically, you know, a 2 to 3 minute read, which is perfect for most people, right? And it gives you the element of what exactly it is. But these are things that I didn't. I'm a guy who's been in business for 30 years. I didn't know what it was. And
so new,
it just makes this huge difference. When someone has a passion about what they're involved in, like you, the difference between what you were talking about 10 years ago when you left Torstar and the way that you speak about what you're involved in now is almost palpable, the level of passion with which you address it. And that's, you know, it's what I'm saying is that it's actually a thread that we have seen when we're talking to entrepreneurs on this podcast. Is that at the end of the day, it's all about the passion. It's not about anything else. Money is there. It comes when it comes, and that's certainly as a byproduct.
And it's secondary, but it's really passion that's at the forefront.
It's at the forefront of what certainly of what you've been doing. And we're gonna post links, obviously, to your podcast, which is a great podcast that's directed specifically to Bitcoin. If you want to find out more about that, we'll post a link.
My podcast is a little hardcore, so I don't recommend my podcast for newcomers to Bitcoin. It's for people who are really
at least
deep
a
down
start.
the rabbit hole.
Yeah,
but I recommend my articles. I would recommend my articles.
The articles, we'll post a link to the medium.com, but before this gets released, you can certainly, people can look up Tomer and medium.com and be able to find those articles and move forward. Listen, I'm always thrilled to talk to you, but I can't remember the last time you and I actually sat down and talked about this level of history and went into this kind of detail. And I learned a ton of things about you, and I thought I knew it all. So this is, to me, this is a huge positive effect on how I'm moving forward with this as well. So thank you so much for joining us here on the Radical Workplace.
It's been fun.
Yeah, it's so great having you.
I reserve the right to have you back 2 years from now when Bitcoin is worth, you know, 128 million. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Mel. Appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
Talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.